This story is titled, Daughter Testified I Was Unfit as a Parent, Giving My Ex Full Custody. Now she's back. After she kicked her out, my ex-wife, 45 female and I 46 male, divorced 3 years ago and have 3 kids together, 24 male, 22 female, and 17 female. Since our 2 older kids were already moved out and in college when we divorced, the only custody and child support this year we had was our youngest daughter, Mary, who was 14 when we split. My ex wanted full custody while I was pushing for shared custody. I had moved into an apartment at this time, and Mary would stay with her mom during the week because it was easier for school. She would come stay with me on weekends, though I answered any questions Mary had about our divorce. But I made it a point to never say anything negative. I didn't want Mary to think that anything she had done was the cause for our divorce. I cherished the weekends we spent together, and from everything I saw, Mary enjoyed our time together too. Then the court hearing came, and when I walked into the courthouse that day, I honestly thought things were going to go fine. I wasn't expecting it to be easy, but I'd convinced myself that Mary wouldn't make things any harder than they already were. I mean, I'd done my best to stay a good dad, even with everything falling apart between Sarah and me. I showed up for every weekend, kept things civil, and never spoke badly about her mom. I thought that counted for something, but as soon as Mary got up to speak, I could feel the room shift. She stood there, clutching her little statement, looking way more confident than a 14-year-old should in that situation. And then she started reading. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The tone in her voice was sharp, like she was trying to make me hurt. She said I was unfit to be a parent, that I didn't care about her, and that I'd only been trying to get custody to hurt her mom. She even said I was selfish and didn't prioritize her needs. I sat there, stunned, while my lawyer shot me a look that basically screamed, "What the hell is happening?" Hearing my own daughter say those things, it felt like a punch right in the gut. I couldn't understand where it was coming from. The way she talked, you'd think I was some deadbeat who never showed up or cared, but I was there. I was always there, even when it felt like Sarah was trying to edge me out of Mary's life. The words kept coming, though. She talked about how she felt unsafe around me, how she wanted nothing to do with my apartment, and how her mom's house was the only place she felt comfortable. She even threw in some weird, exaggerated stuff about my apartment being too small and depressing. I couldn't believe it. I'd worked hard to make that place feel like home for her, and here she was tearing it apart like it was a joke. The whole time, Sarah sat there with this smug little smile. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Mary was doing all the damage for her. I wanted to speak up so badly. I wanted to interrupt and tell Mary she was wrong, to remind her of all the times we'd had fun together, all the weekends I'd spent trying to make her feel normal despite everything going on. But I couldn't. I just had to sit there and take it. By the time Mary finished, my hands were shaking. Not from anger, but from the sheer pain of it all. How could my own daughter, my baby girl, say those things about me? Did she even believe them? Or was this just Sarah's influence? I didn't know what hurt more, the possibility that she truly hated me, or the thought that Sarah had convinced her to. When the hearing ended, I tried to talk to her. I wasn't going to yell or argue, I just wanted to understand. I followed her out into the hallway, called her name, and said, "Mary, can we please talk for a minute?" She didn't even stop. She just glanced over her shoulder and said, "There's nothing to talk about," before walking off with Sarah. And Sarah, of course, turned around and gave me this cold, satisfied look before telling me to leave them alone. I can't even describe how empty I felt in that moment. It wasn't just that Mary didn't want to talk. It was the realization that she might never want to again. I drove home that night in silence, replaying the whole thing over and over in my head. Every word she said felt like a stab. Unfit, selfish, unsafe. None of it made sense, but there was no way to defend myself without making things worse. I spent the next few days wondering where I went wrong. Did I not do enough during the marriage? Was it my fault for moving out and leaving Sarah to handle the weekdays? Or was this just Sarah poisoning Mary against me? It didn't matter which option it was. They all sucked. From that day on, everything changed. I knew I'd lost something important, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back. But the worst part wasn't even the loss. It was the fact that Mary didn't seem to care at all. After the custody hearing, things were different. I don't even know how to explain it. It wasn't like Mary and I had some huge blowout argument or an official "we're done" moment, but after that day, she stopped answering my texts. She wouldn't pick up when I called, and when I tried to check in through Sarah, all I'd get was vague responses or, more often, silence. The weekends I used to look forward to so much, they were just gone. No explanation. No, "I don't want to come over." Nothing. I'd sit in my apartment on Friday nights, waiting for her to show up, hoping maybe she'd changed her mind. But she never did. At first, I told myself she was probably just angry or upset and needed some time. But as the weeks turned into months, it was clear. She was done with me. I didn't want to push her, you know? I thought if I gave her space, she'd come around eventually. So I kept texting her, just little things. Hope you're doing well. Good luck on your test this week. Miss you, kiddo. Stuff like that. I didn't get a single response. Not even a thanks. Every now and then, I'd hear from Josh or Emma. They'd give me bits and pieces about Mary, how school was going, that she'd made the cheerleading team, stuff like that. It wasn't much, but at least it was something. They didn't seem to know much more than I did about why she'd cut me off, though. When I asked if Mary had said anything to them about me, they both said no. She just didn't talk about me at all. One day, Emma called me. She said Mary had mentioned something about feeling abandoned during the divorce. That caught me completely off guard. I mean, I fought tooth and nail for shared custody. How could she think I abandoned her when I was the one trying to keep us connected? I tried reaching out again after that. I sent her a longer text, saying how much I missed her and that I was sorry if she ever felt like I wasn't there for her. I told her I'd always be there if she wanted to talk, no matter what. And you know what I got? Nothing. It was like I didn't exist. At some point, Sarah stopped even pretending to keep me in the loop. Anytime I tried to ask about Mary, her grades, how she was doing emotionally, anything, Sarah would just shut me down. She's fine, she'd say, like that was supposed to be enough. It got to the point where the only connection I had to Mary was the child support payments I sent every month and the college fund I kept contributing to. I didn't stop, though. Even if she hated me, I wasn't going to give up on my responsibility as her dad. It wasn't all bad, though. Around this time, I started dating Lisa. She was a single mom with 3 kids of her own. And honestly, she was the first real bright spot in my life since the divorce. Lisa understood what I was going through. Her ex had made things messy for her, too. Her kids were great, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some stability. But even with Lisa in my life, there was always this Mary-shaped hole I couldn't fill. Every time I saw her picture on social media or heard about her from Josh or Emma, it was like a reminder of how badly I'd failed. I kept thinking, what could I have done differently? How do I fix this? The thing is, I couldn't fix it. Not on my own, anyway. Mary had made her choice. She didn't want me in her life, and I didn't know how to change that without making things worse. So, I drifted. I focused on Lisa, her kids, my job. I told myself that if Mary wanted to reconnect, I'd be ready. Until then, I just had to accept that this was my reality. A father without his daughter, waiting for a relationship that might never come back. It had been 3 years since the custody hearing, and at this point, I had accepted that my relationship with Mary was practically non-existent. I wasn't happy about it, but what could I do? She didn't want me in her life, and I wasn't going to force my way in. Life was finally starting to feel normal again. I was settled in with Lisa, and her kids were great. They weren't replacements for my own kids, but being around them made things feel a little less empty. Lisa and I had a good thing going, and I was happy for the first time in a long while. Then one night, completely out of nowhere, I got a call from Mary. I stared at my phone for a second, almost not believing it. I hadn't heard her voice in over a year. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. I mean, what could she possibly want now? But of course I picked up. "Dad," she said, and immediately I could tell she'd been crying. Her voice cracked like she was trying to hold it together, but it wasn't working. "What's wrong?" I asked, already feeling that knot in my stomach. She started talking fast like she didn't know how much time she had to explain. "Mom kicked me out. I don't have anywhere to go. I didn't know who else to call." Then hearing her say that, after everything, tore me up inside. For so long, I'd been the last person she wanted to talk to. And now, when she had nowhere else to turn, I was the one she called. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or heartbroken. "Of course you can come here," I told her. "We'll figure it out, okay?" Lisa was sitting on the couch next to me, and she gave me this look, half confused, half concerned. I mouthed, "It's Mary," and she nodded, not saying a word. When Mary showed up at the house, she looked different. Not just older, but tired, like she'd been carrying some heavy stuff for a while. She hugged me when she came in, which caught me off guard. I mean, this was the same girl who hadn't even wanted to text me back, and now she was hugging me like her life depended on it. I didn't push her for details right away. I figured she'd tell me when she was ready, and sure enough, later that night she opened up a little. "Mom and I got into a fight," she said, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea Lisa had made her. "She said she can't deal with me anymore. I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside I was furious. I couldn't believe Sarah would just throw her out like that. What happened? I asked gently. Mary hesitated, looking down at the table. I threw a party while she was out of town. Things got out of hand. Some stuff got broken. It wasn't the whole story, I could tell. But I didn't press. What about the other stuff she said? I asked carefully. Mary sighed, her shoulders slumping. She thinks I have a drug problem, but I don't. I've smoked weed a few times, but it's not like I'm doing anything serious. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't sure. This was a side of Mary I didn't really know, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. After she went to bed, Lisa and I stayed up talking. What are you going to do? Lisa asked. I don't know, I admitted. She can stay here for now, but long term? I'm not sure. Lisa looked worried. I want to help, but we have to think about the kids. They don't know her. And if what her mom's saying is true, she didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. It wasn't just about me and Mary anymore. I had a whole new family to consider, and I couldn't just make a decision without thinking of them. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, Mary was back in my life, and all I could think about was how completely unprepared I felt. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea what that was supposed to look like. All I knew was that the next few days were going to be some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The next morning, after Mary had slept in a bit, I decided to get more clarity on what had happened. It wasn't like I wanted to grill her or anything, but if I was going to figure out how to help her, I needed to know the full story. Hey, Mary, I said, as she sat down at the kitchen table for breakfast. Lisa had already taken her kids to school, so it was just the two of us. I don't want to push, but can you tell me more about what happened with your mom? She avoided my eyes, stirring her cereal for way too long before answering. I told you, Dad. I threw a party, some stuff got broken, and Mom freaked out. Okay, I said carefully, trying to keep my tone neutral. But your mom doesn't just kick you out over a party. There's got to be more to it. Mary sighed loudly and pushed her bowl away. She's been on my case for months about stupid stuff. My grades, my friends, everything. The party was just the last straw, I guess. I could tell she wasn't giving me the full picture, but I didn't want to push too hard and make her shut down completely. Instead, I decided to call Sarah and get her side of the story. The call wasn't exactly pleasant. As soon as Sarah picked up, she launched into her usual condescending tone. Oh, so now you want to get involved? Where were you when she was spiraling, huh? Spiraling, I repeated. What are you talking about? Sarah went on to tell me that Mary had been caught skipping school, failing classes, and according to her, hanging out with a bad crowd. She claimed the party wasn't just some minor thing. It had been a full-blown disaster. The house was trashed, and several expensive items were either broken or stolen. And don't even get me started on the drugs, Sarah added. I found weed in her room weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure she's using more than that. Hearing all this made my stomach turn. Was Mary really that far gone? Or was Sarah exaggerating? I knew she wasn't exactly known for handling things calmly. When I got off the phone, I went back to Mary, who was scrolling through her phone on the couch. I talked to your mom, I said, sitting down across from her. Her eyes narrowed. Of course you did. Mary, she said you've been skipping school and failing your classes. Is that true? She shrugged, not meeting my gaze. School's been hard, okay? I've had a lot going on. And the weed? I asked. That got a reaction. She sat up straighter, her face defensive. It's not a big deal, Dad. It's just weed. Everyone smokes it. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm not here to judge, Mary. I just need to understand what's going on so I can help you. She crossed her arms and glared at me. Help me? Like you've been helping me the past 3 years? Yeah, okay. That stung, but I let it slide. Look, your mom thinks you have a drug problem. Is there anything else I need to know? Mary rolled her eyes. She's exaggerating, like always. I threw a party, it got out of hand, and now she's acting like I'm some kind of criminal. I didn't know what to believe. On one hand, Sarah wasn't the most reliable narrator, but on the other, Mary's defensiveness didn't exactly scream innocence. That evening, Lisa and I had a long talk after the kids went to bed. She says it's just weed, I told her, but Sarah's convinced it's more. Lisa looked worried. And you believe her? I don't know, I admitted. Mary's not exactly giving me much to work with. Lisa sighed. Look, I feel for her, but we have to think about the kids. If what Sarah's saying is true, having her here might not be the best idea. I nodded, even though it made me feel sick to my stomach. The idea of turning Mary away after she'd finally come to me for help felt wrong. But Lisa had a point. Her kids didn't know Mary at all, and the last thing I wanted was to bring chaos into their lives. The truth was, I felt completely stuck. Mary needed help. Real help. But I didn't know if I could give it to her. And with Lisa's concerns hanging over me, I started to wonder if I was in way over my head. The next day, I knew it was time to make a call. Mary was still at the house, acting like nothing was wrong. She was on her phone most of the time, barely speaking to me or Lisa unless she needed something. The tension in the house was thick. Lisa was trying to keep things normal for her kids, but I could tell she was worried. After the kids went to bed, Lisa and I sat down in the kitchen. "We need to decide what we're doing here," Lisa said, her voice low but firm. "I want to help her. I really do. But she can't just stay here indefinitely." I nodded, staring at the table. I'd been running scenarios in my head all day, and none of them felt right. "I know," I said, "but I don't know where else she's supposed to go. She's my daughter, Lisa. How do I just tell her no?" Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples. "I get it, I really do. But you have to think about what this means for the rest of us. She's 17, and she's obviously going through something serious. I'm worried about what kind of influence she could have on the kids." She wasn't wrong. As much as it hurt to admit, Lisa's kids were my responsibility too now. They didn't ask for any of this, and I couldn't risk them being dragged into Mary's problems. "I'll talk to her," I said finally, "but it's not going to be easy." That night, I knocked on Mary's door. She was lying on the bed scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when I came in. "What?" she asked, her tone cold and dismissive. "Mary, we need to talk," I said, sitting down on the chair by the desk. She rolled her eyes and sat up, crossing her arms. "Let me guess. Mom called you again, and now you're going to lecture me?" "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't about your mom. It's about what happens next." Her face immediately hardened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a deep breath, already feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "Mary, you can't stay here long term. This house isn't set up for that. And with everything going on, I just don't think it's the right environment for you." Her mouth dropped open, and for a second, she just stared at me. Then the anger hit. "Are you serious?" she snapped. "You said you'd help me. You're my dad, and you're just going to throw me out? Again?" "I'm not throwing you out," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I want to help you, but I don't think this is the best place for you right now. We can look into other options, maybe counseling or a program that can give you the support you need." "Oh my God," she cut me off, standing up. "You really don't get it, do you? I don't need some stupid program. I just need a place to stay, and you can't even do that for me?" "Mary," I said, standing up too, "it's not that simple. There are other people in this house to consider." "Of course," she interrupted, throwing her hands in the air. "Your new perfect family? Guess I don't fit into that, huh?" Her words stung, but I couldn't let her guilt me into making a decision I wasn't sure was right. "That's not fair," I said quietly. "I've been trying to reach out to you for years, and you shut me out every time. Now you show up out of nowhere, and I'm supposed to just drop everything?" She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "You don't get it. You never got it. I called you because I didn't have anyone else, and now I see why." With that, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, she packed her things and left without saying a word. I tried to talk to her before she left, but she just brushed me off. As the door closed behind her, I felt a crushing sense of failure. I'd tried to do what was best. For her, for Lisa, for everyone. But it didn't feel like enough. Watching her leave was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but I didn't see any other way. Now, I'm left wondering if I made the right choice. Did I protect my family? Or did I just fail my daughter when she needed me the most? After Mary left, the house felt different. Quieter. Heavier. Even Lisa, who had been the most concerned about having her stay, seemed a little off. She tried to reassure me that I'd done the right thing, but it didn't feel that way. How could it? My daughter, who had come to me for help, had walked out the door, and I let her. The first few days after she left, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. I kept hearing her voice. "You don't get it. You never got it." Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't tried hard enough to understand what she was going through. I reached out to Sarah, hoping she might give me an update on where Mary had gone, but my calls went unanswered. No texts back, no voicemails. Josh and Emma were just as in the dark as I was. Josh said Mary wasn't responding to him either, and Emma told me, "She'll talk when she's ready, Dad. You just have to wait." Wait. That's all I'd been doing for years. Waiting for Mary to come around, waiting for her to open up, waiting for her to let me be her dad again. And now, when she'd finally turned to me, I'd sent her away. I couldn't shake the guilt. I threw myself into work and into spending time with Lisa and her kids, trying to distract myself. But no matter what I did, Mary was always on my mind. At night, when the house was quiet, I'd sit in the living room and wonder where she was, what she was doing, and if she was okay. I kept thinking about the last few years, how our relationship had fallen apart, and all the missed chances to fix it. Maybe if I'd pushed harder back then, this wouldn't have happened. Maybe if I'd fought more for shared custody, or refused to let Sarah have so much control, Mary wouldn't have drifted so far away. But maybe doesn't change anything. It's just noise. A couple of weeks later, I got a text from Josh. Hey, Dad. Heard from Mary. She's back at Mom's. Doesn't want to talk about what happened. It was a relief to know where she was, but it didn't make me feel much better. She was back in the same situation that had driven her to call me in the first place. What if it just happened again? I tried texting her. Just something simple. Hey, Mary. I'm glad you're safe. Please let me know if you need anything. I'm always here. No response. Lisa did her best to comfort me, but even she struggled to find the right words. One night, after the kids were in bed, she said, "You can't beat yourself up forever, you know. You tried to help her, but you also had to think about what was best for everyone." I know, I said, staring at the floor. But she's still my kid. I should have done more. Lisa sat down next to me. You can't pour from an empty cup. You've been doing everything you can, and at some point, Mary has to meet you halfway. It sounded reasonable, but it didn't feel that way. As a parent, you're supposed to show up no matter what. But when she finally needed me most, I'd sent her back to the same place that had hurt her. Months went by, and things started to settle back into a routine. I kept texting Mary every now and then, even though I never got a reply. Josh and Emma visited more often, but whenever I asked about Mary, they'd change the subject or shrug like they didn't know what to say. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I could have done differently. Should I have fought harder to keep her at my house? Should I have ignored Lisa's concerns and focused solely on Mary? Or would that have caused even more damage in the long run? The truth is, I don't know. Maybe I'll never know. All I can do now is keep trying, keep reaching out, keep showing up, and hope that one day, Mary will let me back into her life. Until then, I'm stuck in this limbo, regretting the past, unsure about the future, and wishing I'd done better when my parents maxed out my credit card for my golden child sister. So I did this. So let me just get this off my chest, because I've been holding it in for way too long. My parents, they have a favorite, and it's not me. It's my sister Ellie. She's been their golden child forever, and I'm the one who just gets by. I didn't really notice how bad it was growing up because, I thought all families were like this. But now, looking back, it's clear as day. The favoritism wasn't subtle, and it definitely wasn't fair. Ellie's been chasing this dream of being a model for a few years now, and my parents are all over it like she's going to be the next big thing. Spoiler, she's not. I'm not saying that to be mean, but it's just reality. She's had a few gigs, but nothing major, and now things are drying up for her. But guess what? Instead of helping her see that maybe it's time to move on, my parents keep throwing money at her like it's going to magically fix everything. And the worst part? They're doing it at my expense. I mean, it wasn't always this obvious. When we were younger, Ellie would get more toys, more clothes, more attention, but I brushed it off. I thought, okay, maybe she's just going through a phase, and they're trying to help her out. But now, it's like they've taken it to a whole new level. They actually planned this whole vacation to Hawaii just to cheer her up because her modeling career wasn't doing well. Are you kidding me? Like, who gets a Hawaii vacation as a pick-me-up for not being successful? Here's where it gets really messed up. I only found out about the Hawaii trip by accident. They didn't even tell me. I overheard my mom on the phone talking to one of her friends about how Ellie really needs this getaway and how it's going to be a great reset for her. I was just sitting there hearing all this, thinking, wait, what? A reset? For what? I work 12-hour shifts as a nurse, busting my butt at the hospital. And the one time I actually get a day off, I'm overhearing how they're spending my money on some luxury vacation for Ellie. Yeah, you heard that right. My money. You see, a few years ago, my parents hit some financial struggles. At least that's what they said. And I, being the loyal daughter I am, stepped in to help. They needed a little support, just until they got back on their feet. I gave them access to my credit card, trusting them to be responsible with it. I figured, they're my parents. They wouldn't take advantage of me. Ha, if only I knew what was coming. At first, the charges were small. Groceries, gas, a bill here or there. No big deal, right? But slowly, over time, the expenses started to grow. New furniture, electronics, dinners at expensive restaurants. And every time I asked about it, they'd brush it off like it was nothing. Oh, we just needed a little something to feel better. Don't worry, we'll pay you back soon. Except that soon never came. And I was too busy with work to really notice how bad it was getting. All right, so this is where things really started going downhill, and I mean fast. After the whole Hawaii trip reveal, I was already feeling like something had to give, like how much more of this was I supposed to put up with? But the thing that finally broke me wasn't even the vacation, it was the stupid handbag incident. So picture this. I just finished a long shift at the hospital. Patients, paperwork, the whole deal. I get home and there's this big box sitting on my doorstep. Now, I don't remember ordering anything, so I'm kind of confused, thinking, did I forget I bought something online? But no, my name's on the package and it's from some high-end designer brand. Like, the kind of place I would never shop at. I'm talking hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars for a single item. I drag the box inside and open it up, and there it is. A designer handbag. Fancy leather, gold accents, the whole deal. My first reaction? Pure confusion. I'm standing there, staring at this bag like, did someone send this to me by mistake? There's no way this is mine. I check the receipt inside, and yep, my name's on it. It's definitely meant for me. Or so I thought. So, like any normal person, I call my mom. Maybe it's a gift? Maybe, after everything, they're finally acknowledging how hard I work, and this is their way of saying thanks. I should have known better. Hey, Mom, I say, I got this package today. It's a designer handbag, and it has my name on it. Did you send this? She laughs. Actually laughs. Oh, Helen, that's not for you. It was supposed to go to Ellie. Must have been a mix-up with the address. At first, I thought she was joking. Like, seriously. But nope, she was dead serious. She goes on to explain how they bought it for Ellie because she's got some modeling gig coming up and she needs to look the part. I just stood there, holding the phone, holding the stupid handbag, feeling my blood boil. So it's not for me? I ask, just to be sure I'm hearing this right. No, honey, you don't really need something that expensive, do you? I mean, you're a nurse. Ellie needs it more for her career. You understand, right? And there it was. The thing that had been lurking under the surface for years, finally said out loud, "You're just a nurse." That's what she thought of me. All the years I'd spent studying, working long hours, sacrificing sleep and weekends, all of it boiled down to, you're just a nurse. Meanwhile, Ellie, the golden child, needed to look the part for her modeling career that wasn't even going anywhere. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like the universe was slapping me in the face. I'd always known there was favoritism, but this was a next level. Not only was I not good enough to deserve a luxury handbag, but my career, the one I'd worked so hard for, wasn't even worthy of anything nice. And all because I wasn't chasing some superficial dream like Ellie was. I don't even remember how the rest of the conversation went. I think I just mumbled something about sending the bag to Ellie and hung up. My mind was spinning and I was pissed. Like, beyond pissed. It wasn't about the handbag. It was never about the handbag. It was about how they saw me, how they'd always seen me. And here's the thing. It's not like I need fancy things to feel good about myself. I don't need a designer bag to validate my career. But to have my own mother flat out tell me that I wasn't worth it, that was a different kind of hurt. Like, they didn't see me at all. All they saw was Ellie and her endless failing attempts to make it big, and I was just there. The reliable one. The one who didn't need anything because I'd always figure it out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. But there was nothing to make sense of. They'd shown me who they really were, who they'd always been, and I couldn't unsee it anymore. So the next day, I decided to take action. I wasn't going to let them keep using me like this. I packed up the handbag and sent it off to Ellie. I didn't bother leaving a note or anything, just shipped it and washed my hands of it. But that was just the beginning. I started going through my credit card statements, and that's when I realized just how deep this thing went. They weren't just using my card for little things here and there. We're talking big charges, luxury items, dinners, trips, all in the name of helping Ellie. And the worst part? I'd let it happen. I'd been so caught up in work and trying to juggle everything that I didn't even notice the slow bleed. That's when I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep letting them take advantage of me like this. I'd spent my whole life being the responsible one, the one who always picked up the pieces, but I was done. This wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, or lack of it. I made a plan. The next time they called me asking for help, I wasn't going to just hand it over. I'd been doing that for too long. I needed to stand up for myself, for the life I'd built on my own. Because clearly if I didn't, no one else would. The funny thing is, even after all this, they didn't seem to think they'd done anything wrong. It was like they were living in some alternate reality where everything revolved around Ellie, and I was just there to foot the bill. But I was done being their safety net, done being the backup plan when things didn't go their way. The next time they'd ask for help, They were in for a rude awakening. I wasn't just some ATM they could withdraw from whenever they wanted. I had my own life, my own dreams, and I wasn't going to keep letting them drain me dry. If they wanted to keep spoiling Ellie and living in their little fantasy world, they could do it without me. And you know what? I think deep down, they knew it. They knew they'd push me too far this time. Because after I sent that bag back, the calls started coming more frequently. They'd check in, ask how work was going, casually drop hints about needing a little help here or there. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. I could feel the shift. They knew they were losing their grip, and I was ready to let go. The next move was mine. And this time, I wasn't playing by their rules. All right, so after the whole handbag thing, I knew something had to change. My parents were clearly just using me to bankroll their lifestyle, and I had let it go on for way too long. But this time, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I'd been keeping quiet, playing along, trying to be the good daughter for years, but enough was enough. They thought they had me under control. They thought I'd just keep paying for their mistakes and covering for Ellie's failures without a second thought. But I had other plans, and the best part? They didn't see it coming at all. So here's what went down. After shipping the handbag back to Ellie, I spent a couple of days thinking about how to handle this whole situation. I could have just cut them off completely right then, but I knew that wouldn't teach them anything. If I just stopped paying, they'd find some other way to manipulate me. No, I wanted them to feel it. I wanted them to understand what they'd done to me for all these years. That's when I came up with the idea. I was going to let them go on their precious vacation, but I wasn't going to fund it. Not this time. They'd been planning this Hawaii trip for months, all for Ellie, of course. My parents were acting like it was going to be the highlight of the year. Luxury hotels, fancy dinners, spa treatments, the whole 9 yards, and they were going to pay for it all with my credit card, or so they thought. I waited until the night before they were set to leave. They were packing up, all excited, talking about how this trip is exactly what Ellie needs right now. I showed up at their house, pretending to be totally fine with everything. Played the part. I even told them, "Hey, I got you a new credit card. The old one's been acting up lately, and I don't want you to have any issues while you're in Hawaii." My mom looked at me with this relieved smile, like she actually thought I was doing her a favor. "Oh, Helen, you're such a lifesaver. We were worried the old card might not work. You always know just what we need." "Yeah, I bet I do, Mom." I handed her the card, keeping my face completely neutral. Inside, I was ready to explode, but on the outside, calm. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. The card I gave them wasn't new at all. It was canceled. Totally useless. But I didn't tell them that. I let them pack their bags, get all hyped for the trip, and sent them on their way. It was the calm before the storm, and I was just waiting for the moment when everything would come crashing down. For the next few days, I kept my phone close. I knew the calls were coming, but I wanted to savor the silence for just a little while longer. Then, finally, it happened. The first notification popped up on my banking app. Decline charge. They'd tried to pay for dinner at some fancy restaurant, and the card didn't go through. I almost laughed when I saw it. A few hours later, another notification. Spa treatment declined. And then, later that evening, a declined helicopter tour. They were racking up failed charges faster than I expected. I could practically picture it. My mom and dad sitting there, confused, embarrassed, trying to figure out what was going on. They'd probably called the restaurant over to run the card again, thinking it was a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was exactly what I planned. The phone calls started soon after that. I let the first couple go to voicemail because, honestly, I wasn't ready to deal with them just yet. I needed them to sit with it for a little while longer. Let them squirm. Let them feel the panic building up. They'd been doing this to me for years, and now it was their turn. When I finally picked up the phone, it was my dad. I could hear the frustration in his voice right away. "Helen, we've got a problem. The card's not working. We tried to pay for dinner last night, and they said it was declined. Can you check on it?" I played dumb. "Really? That's weird. I'll look into it." I could hear my mom in the background, whispering something about needing to pay for a hotel. They were panicking now, and it was almost satisfying. Almost. I didn't do anything, of course. Just let them twist in the wind. The next day, more calls. Voicemails filled with urgency, telling me how they couldn't pay for anything and how embarrassing it was. Each message was more frantic than the last, but I wasn't ready to call them back yet. I wanted them to hit rock bottom. I wanted them to feel helpless, just like I'd felt when they kept draining my bank account without even thinking about how it affected me. And the thing is, I knew they weren't broke. My parents had money. They just didn't want to spend it. Why would they when they had me to pay for everything? Finally, after a couple more days of ignored calls, I picked up the phone again. This time it was my mom. She sounded more desperate than I'd ever heard her. Helen, please. We can't check out of the hotel until we pay the bill. They won't let us leave. We don't have enough cash and the card isn't working. Can you fix it? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was it. No, Mom, I'm not fixing it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. What do you mean, no? We need your help. You can't just leave us stranded here. I'm done helping, I said, my voice firm. You've been using me for years and I'm tired of it. This is on you now. You figure out how to get home. I'm not paying for anything anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my mom trying to find the right words, trying to guilt me, but nothing came out. She knew I was serious. Finally, she whispered, "But we're your parents. You can't just leave us like this." I almost laughed at how absurd it was. After everything they'd done, after all the money they'd taken from me without a second thought, they still thought they could guilt me into bailing them out. "Yeah, well, you've left me high and dry for years," I said. "So now it's your turn. I'm done being your bank." And with that, I hung up the phone. I wasn't going to listen to their excuses anymore. I'd made my point, and for once, I was putting myself first. As I sat there, phone in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. They were on their own now. They could figure it out or they could flounder. Either way, I was done. And honestly, it felt damn good. After I hung up the phone with my mom, I sat there for a while just processing everything. I couldn't believe I'd actually done it. For the first time in my life, I'd said no, and it felt good. Like, really good. But at the same time, I knew it wasn't over. My parents didn't just give up that easily. They'd call again. They'd try to guilt me, manipulate me, make me feel like the bad guy for standing up for myself. And honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But the thing was, I had to be. I was tired of being used, of being the one they always counted on while they treated Ellie like some princess. I deserved better than that. And if they couldn't see it, well, that was on them, not me. The next day, I checked my phone, expecting another barrage of calls or texts from my parents. But there was nothing, just silence. It was almost eerie, like they were plotting something, trying to figure out their next move. I half expected them to show up at my door demanding answers, but that didn't happen either. Instead, what I got was more declined notifications. Every time I checked my banking app, there it was, declined. They'd tried to pay for some fancy lunch, declined. They attempted to book a tour, declined. They even tried to hit up a luxury store, declined. It was almost like clockwork, and with every notification, I felt more and more justified in my decision. I mean, seriously? They had no problem living the high life on my dime, but the second I took control, they were completely helpless. It was like they didn't know how to function without my money backing them up. And that's when it hit me. They'd gotten so used to me being their safety net that they didn't even try to make a plan for themselves. They just assumed I'd keep picking up the pieces. But not this time. Still, the silence from them was unsettling. My mom usually couldn't go more than a few hours without calling me about something, so the fact that I hadn't heard from them since I said no was weird. I knew they were up to something, but I didn't know what. And honestly, I didn't care. Let them figure it out. They were grown adults. It wasn't my responsibility to fix everything for them anymore. But just when I thought they might actually leave me alone for a bit, the phone rang again. I glanced at the screen and saw my dad's name pop up. I sighed, knowing this conversation was going to be a mess, but I figured I might as well get it over with. I picked up the call, bracing myself. "Hey, Dad," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Helen, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "We're still having issues with the card. Every time we try to pay for something, it's declined. What's going on?" I could hear the frustration in his voice, but I wasn't about to cave. "I already told you, Dad. I canceled the card. You can't use it anymore." He was quiet for a moment, like he didn't know how to respond. "Why would you do that? We're stuck here with no way to pay for anything. You can't just leave us stranded like this." That word again. Stranded. Like it was my fault they were in this mess. Like I had somehow forced them to rely on me for everything. "You're not stranded," I said, trying to stay calm. "You're in Hawaii. You're not exactly in the middle of nowhere. You have options. Use your own money." "We don't have enough," he snapped, and I could hear my mom in the background saying something, probably trying to calm him down. "You know we don't have that kind of cash on us. We need you to fix this, Helen. This isn't funny." I felt a wave of anger surge through me. "I never said it was funny, but I'm not fixing it. You've been using me for years, and I'm done with it. This is your mess to clean up, not mine." He was quiet again, and I could tell he didn't know how to handle this. I'd never stood up to them like this before. I'd always been the one to swoop in and save the day, but now they were on their own, and it was hitting them hard. Helen, please! My mom's voice came through the phone, softer, but no less desperate. We're your parents. We didn't mean to hurt you. You just what? I interrupted. Used me? Took advantage of me? Lied to me? I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but that's exactly what you did. Over and over again. Her voice broke, and I could hear her trying not to cry. Normally that would have gotten to me. Normally I'd feel guilty and try to make things right. But not this time. I wasn't going to let their emotions control me anymore. I'd spent too many years putting their needs ahead of mine, and I was done. We just didn't think it was a big deal, she finally said, her voice small. We thought you wouldn't mind helping. You've always helped us before. Yeah, and look where that's gotten me, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I can't even get approved for a loan because of all the debt you've racked up in my name. I've been working my ass off, and you've been living like royalty on my money. And for what? To keep Ellie happy? To make sure she doesn't have to face the fact that her modeling career is going nowhere? I'm not doing it anymore. I could hear my dad sigh on the other end of the line. He knew I was right, but that didn't make it any easier for him to admit it. We didn't mean to put you in this position, Helen. We thought, you didn't think, I cut him off. You never think about me. You never think about what I need or what I'm going through. It's always about Ellie, and I'm done with that. There was another long pause. I could tell they were both struggling with what I was saying, but at this point, I didn't care. They needed to hear it. They needed to understand that things were different now. We'll figure it out, my dad finally said, his voice resigned. We'll find a way home. Good, I replied, feeling the weight of the conversation start to lift. That's what you should have been doing all along. After I hung up, I sat there for a while, just letting the silence sink in. It was done. The fight was over, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own life. My parents were on their own now. It was up to them to figure out how to deal with the mess they'd created, and me, I was finally free. Update 1. After that last conversation with my parents, I thought, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally get the message. But of course, that would have been too easy, right? Things never go that smoothly with them. A few days after I told them to figure it out themselves, I get another call from my mom. At this point, I'm thinking, what now? But I pick up because honestly, I want to see if they've learned anything. Spoiler alert, they hadn't. Helen, we're still in Hawaii, she says, her voice practically shaking. Now, I already knew they hadn't left yet because I'd been keeping an eye on my credit card just in case they somehow managed to get access again. But hearing her say it made me roll my eyes. I could tell she was trying to guilt trip me, but I wasn't biting. Yeah, I figured, I replied. So, what's your plan? She hesitated for a second. We're kind of stuck. We don't have enough money to book a flight back, and the hotel won't let us stay any longer without paying. They're asking us to settle the bill before we can check out. I could practically feel the panic in her voice, but it wasn't hitting me like it used to. I wasn't feeling guilty anymore. Instead, I was annoyed. How had they gotten themselves into this mess? Oh wait, I knew exactly how. Years of living off my back without a second thought about the consequences. And you thought I'd fix that for you? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm but firm. Mom, I told you, I'm done. You need to figure this out. But Helen, we don't have the money, she cried. And I could hear my dad in the background mumbling something about selling something or borrowing from someone. The desperation in her voice was real, but that didn't change the fact that they'd dug this hole themselves. I wasn't about to jump in after them. I sighed. You've had years to figure out how to manage your money. You chose to ignore that and live like I'd always bail you out. Now, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Her voice wavered. We made mistakes. We know that. But we're your parents. You can't just leave us here. That was the part that got me. They really thought I couldn't just leave them there. That no matter how much they'd used me, no matter how much they'd taken from me without caring about how it affected me, I was still supposed to step in and save them because they were my parents. But the truth is, I could leave them there. And I was going to. I can, I said, my voice steady. And I am. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear my mom trying to find the words to change my mind, but nothing came out. I'd made my decision, and for once, I wasn't wavering. Helen, please. My dad's voice cut in this time, sounding more defeated than I'd ever heard him. We're sorry. We know we messed up. We'll make it right when we get back, but we just need help this one last time. That one last time line? Yeah, I'd heard that before. Too many times, actually. And every time I'd believed it. Every time I'd given them another chance, only to watch them screw me over again. I'm not doing this again, I said, my voice firm. You've had enough chances. I'm not your backup plan anymore. But Helen, we're your family, my mom said, her voice barely a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. Yeah, well, I'm your family too. But you didn't care about that when you were using my credit card to fund Ellie's trips and dinners and shopping sprees. You didn't care about that when you were living off my money while I was working overtime just to keep up with your spending. They didn't have anything to say to that. And really, what could they say? They knew I was right. They knew they'd crossed the line, but they still thought they could somehow guilt me into helping them. Not this time. I ended the call after telling them again to figure it out. I knew it sounded harsh, but I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. They were adults. They could figure it out. They had to. A few hours later, I got a text from my sister. Of course, it was about the same thing. Hey, Helen, Mom and Dad told me what's going on. Can you please just help them this one last time? They're really struggling and I feel bad. I almost laughed when I read it. Ellie, the golden child, the one who my parents had spoiled for years, was now asking me to feel bad for them. Where was she when they were taking advantage of me? Where was she when they were spending my money on her without a second thought? I didn't even bother replying. I was done with all of them. The next few days were quiet. No more calls, no more texts. It was almost eerie, but I figured they'd found some way to scrape together the money to get home. I wasn't about to check in and see if they were okay. They were on their own now, and I was finally free from the constant weight of their needs. It wasn't until the following week that I got another call. This time, it was from my mom again. I braced myself, expecting more guilt tripping, but instead, her voice was different. Helen, she said quietly, we're back home. I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. We sold some things and borrowed from a friend to get the money for the flight back, she explained, her voice soft. We wanted to apologize. We know we've put you through a lot. I was surprised, to be honest. I hadn't expected them to actually say sorry. But at the same time, I wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully, but I meant what I said. I'm done helping you. You need to figure things out for yourselves from now on. There was a long pause, and then my mom sighed. We understand. We'll try to be better. I didn't say anything. I didn't know if they really would be better, but at that point, it didn't matter. I'd set my boundaries, and they were going to have to deal with it. After we hung up, I felt this weird mix of emotions. Relief, mostly, but also a little bit of sadness. It's hard to let go of people who are supposed to be there for you, especially when they've let you down so many times. But I knew it was the right decision. For the first time in a long time, I was putting myself first. And it felt damn good. Update 2. I thought cutting them off would be the hard part. I figured once I stopped giving them money, they'd finally realize they had to figure out their own lives. But nope, that's not how it went down. My parents? They went nuclear. It started small with a couple of texts from relatives. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just the usual, hey, haven't heard from you in a while, or how's everything going with your parents? Stuff like that. I thought they were just being nosy, or maybe hadn't heard about the whole Hawaii situation. But then it got weird. My aunt texted me one night saying something like, I'm so sorry you're going through this, Helen. Just know that we're here for you. I stared at my phone, confused. Sorry for what? I replied. But she didn't answer right away. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just being vague or dramatic, which, honestly, wasn't out of character for her. But then, more messages started coming in, and they weren't so nice. Cousins, distant relatives, even old family friends started reaching out. Except now it wasn't, how are you? It was, how could you abandon your parents like that? Or, I can't believe you'd leave them stranded in another country. And that's when it hit me. They were spreading lies. I'm not even joking. My parents had apparently decided that if they couldn't guilt me into helping them, they'd try to shame me into it. They'd started telling everyone, and I mean everyone, that I'd abandoned them, left them stranded in Hawaii with no money and no way home. The way they spun it, I sounded like the worst daughter on the planet. I tried to let it slide at first. I figured people would realize it was just a sob story and they'd eventually see through it. But no, my parents weren't just telling people in private. They took it public. Like, really public. I found out from a coworker of all people. We were on break when she casually mentioned, hey, I saw your mom's post. That's so rough. I didn't know things were that bad with your family. I looked up from my phone, totally confused. What post? You didn't see it? She asked, sounding a little awkward, like she wished she hadn't said anything. It's all over Facebook. Your mom posted this long thing about how they got stranded in Hawaii and how you wouldn't help them. People are really going off in the comments. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't even bother finishing my break. I went straight to my phone and pulled up Facebook. And there it was. A full-on dramatic post from my mom, complete with pictures from their tragic trip to Hawaii. The captions were something else, too. Stuff like, "When your own daughter turns her back on you in your time of need," and "abandoned by the person we raised and loved." The comment section? Oh, it was a dumpster fire. People I didn't even know were chiming in, calling me everything from selfish to ungrateful. And the worst part? A lot of them were family members, people I'd known my whole life, jumping on the bandwagon and tearing me apart without even asking my side of the story. I sat there, scrolling through comment after comment, feeling like I was being punched in the gut over and over again. They'd twisted everything. The post made it seem like I'd coldly refused to help my poor, innocent parents who were just trying to get by. No mention of the years of financial abuse, no mention of how they'd used me, drained me, and left me with nothing. Just the story of a heartless daughter who abandoned her parents in paradise. The next few days were hell. I got texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years, some of them straight up accusing me of being the worst daughter ever, others pretending to be concerned and asking if everything was okay, like I didn't know they were just fishing for gossip. It was all a sick game, and I was the villain in my parents' sob story. I tried explaining my side to a few people, but it didn't really help. By the time I even had a chance to respond, the damage was done. My parents had already spun the story their way, and no matter what I said, people had already made up their minds. It was like talking to a wall. They didn't care about the truth. They just loved the drama. At one point, I thought about calling my mom to tell her to take the post down. But what good would that do? She wanted people to see it. She wanted the sympathy, the attention, the validation that she was the victim. And honestly, I don't think she cared about the fallout it was causing for me. All that mattered was that she looked good, that people saw her as the loving, devoted mother who was wronged by her ungrateful daughter. And you know what the worst part is? Some people did reach out to me asking for my side of the story. But even when I explained everything, even when I laid out all the facts about how my parents had been using me for years, some of them just didn't want to believe it. It was easier for them to believe the lie than face the fact that my parents, the people they'd known and trusted, were capable of something like this. The whole thing messed with my head. For weeks, I felt like I couldn't go anywhere without people whispering behind my back. Every family event, every social gathering, I knew people were judging me. And for what? For finally standing up for myself? For refusing to let my parents drain me dry? But here's the thing. As much as it sucked, and believe me, it really sucked, I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to back down just because they decided to drag my name through the mud. I'd come too far to go back to being the daughter they could control with guilt and manipulation. So I stopped checking the comments. I stopped trying to explain myself to people who didn't want to hear it. And slowly, the noise started to die down. People moved on to the next drama, the next family scandal, and I was left with a sense of quiet that, for once, didn't feel like a trap. But I won't forget what they did. The way they tried to turn everyone against me. The way they painted me as the villain to cover up their own mistakes. It's something that sticks with you, something that changes the way you see people. And yeah, it hurt, but it also made me stronger. I'm not their safety net anymore. I'm not their scapegoat. And no matter how many Facebook posts they make, no matter how many people they turn against me, I know I did the right thing. And in the end, that's all that really matters. Parents refused to help with my college. Now they expect me to loan them money. All right, here goes nothing. So my name's Kevin, I'm 32, and I work as a mechanic. It's not a fancy job, but it pays the bills, and I actually enjoy it. You get to see stuff getting fixed, and I like the feeling of solving a problem. Plus, owning my own little garage now means I don't have to answer to some clueless manager. Anyway, that's not the point here. The point is, my family is kind of a mess, and my sister Amy is a huge part of that. Let me give you a bit of background. Growing up, my family wasn't poor, but we weren't well off either. My mom, Janice, worked at a local diner, and my dad, Rick, is a truck driver. Nothing glamorous. They worked hard, but there was never a ton of extra cash lying around. My parents were practical, which is why what happened with Amy still blows my mind. So Amy is my younger sister by about 3 years. She's always been the golden child. You know, the type who got everything handed to her on a silver platter while I was expected to figure things out on my own, and she never worked for anything in her life. Growing up, it was like she could do no wrong. If she wanted something, my parents would bend over backward to make it happen. But if I wanted anything, I had to work for it or forget about it. I'm not going to lie, I've always been a bit resentful about that. I mean, how could I not be? There I was, busting my ass mowing lawns, working odd jobs, and doing whatever I could to save up for things, while Amy was getting handed money to go shopping with her friends or whatever. My parents acted like it was no big deal, but trust me, it got under my skin. Anyway, fast forward a bit to when I was about 27. I'd finally saved up enough to buy my first house. Nothing fancy, just a little two-bedroom fixer-upper on the edge of town. It wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it was mine, you know? I spent months fixing it up. Paint, new floors, redoing the kitchen, the whole thing. I was proud of it. I mean, it was the first time in my life I really felt like I'd accomplished something big on my own. So naturally, I decided to host Thanksgiving that year. I figured it'd be a good way to show off my hard work to my family. So I invited my parents, and even though I knew it'd be a pain, I invited Amy too. She'd been dating this real estate guy, John, for about a year at that point. This guy was loaded, or at least that's what Amy kept bragging about. Fancy car, nice clothes, living in some luxury condo downtown. Whatever. I didn't care about his money. Good for him, I guess. But what I didn't expect was how Amy and John were going to act at Thanksgiving. The day comes, and I've been cooking all day, cleaning the house, making sure everything's perfect. My parents show up, and everything's going smoothly. We're talking, catching up, eating appetizers, normal stuff. Then Amy and John roll up. Now, right off the bat, Amy comes in with this attitude like she's better than everyone else. She walks around the house looking at everything like she's inspecting it. I tried to let it go, but I could feel my blood starting to boil. She starts making these little comments about how small the house is, how old-fashioned the decor looks, and how the neighborhood isn't exactly safe. She doesn't stop there, though. She goes on and on about how John's condo is huge, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city, and some fancy security system. I kept my mouth shut, but I was seething inside. Like, seriously? Who comes to someone's house for Thanksgiving and spends the whole time criticizing it? My parents didn't say anything, of course. They just sat there, probably thinking, oh, that's just Amy. I could feel my patience slipping away, but I was trying to be the bigger person, you know? I didn't want to cause a scene. But then she crossed the line. She starts talking about how John pays for everything, how lucky she is to be with him, and how she'd never have to live in a place like mine. Like, really rubbing it in my face. That's when I lost it. I looked at her and said, at least I bought this house with my own money. I worked for it. I didn't need our parents to pay for anything, and I definitely didn't need to rely on someone else's paycheck to get it. Can you say the same? Amy's face went red, and I could tell I'd hit a nerve. John, who had been pretty quiet up until that point, gave me this annoyed look, but he didn't say anything. My parents just sat there, awkward as hell, like they had no idea what to do. I didn't care anymore. I was pissed. Then I told her, if you think you're too good for my place, you can show yourself the door. No one's keeping you here. And that was it. She and John stormed out without saying another word. My parents tried to calm me down afterward, saying things like, she didn't mean it, and you know how she is. But I wasn't having it. I'd had enough. I told them I wasn't going to keep putting up with her crap just because she's family. From that moment on, Amy and I stopped talking. I haven't seen her since that day, and honestly, I'm fine with it. My life's been a lot less stressful without her in it. My parents, though, they've never stopped trying to get us to make up. Every once in a while, they'll bring her up saying stuff like, family's family, or you two should let bygones be bygones. But I'm not interested. Amy's always been a spoiled, entitled brat, and nothing's changed. So yeah, that's how it all went down. My sister hasn't spoken to me in 5 years because I finally stood up to her. And honestly, I don't miss her. She was always a source of stress, and my life's better without her drama. All right, so here we are, 5 years after that whole Thanksgiving disaster. Things have been pretty quiet between Amy and me. Honestly, I thought it'd just stay that way, and I was totally fine with it. No drama, no stress. But of course, nothing ever stays simple for long when family's involved. A couple of weeks ago, my mom calls me up out of the blue. I hadn't heard from her in a little while, which wasn't unusual. We'd been on decent terms since the whole Amy thing went down, but we didn't talk every day or anything. Anyway, she calls, and the first thing she says is, Kevin, we need to talk. Now, when someone says that, it's never good, right? My mind starts racing, thinking maybe something bad happened with Dad's health or something. But nope, it's not that. Instead, she drops this bombshell on me. Amy's getting married to that same guy, John, from 5 years ago, the guy who was with her during that Thanksgiving nightmare. I'll be honest, my first reaction wasn't great. I just kind of sighed and said, oh, okay, because, well, what else was I supposed to say? It's not like I care about Amy's relationship status anymore, but I figured that's where the conversation would end. Nope. Mom starts going on about how Amy's wedding is this huge deal and how it's going to be really fancy. She's talking about venues, flowers, the whole 9 yards. And of course, she's excited. My parents have always been way more invested in Amy's life than mine. It's just the way things have always been. But then, she says something that makes me pause. We've promised Amy that we'll cover the cost of the venue and decorations, Mom says. But Kevin, we're going to need a little help. I had to do a double take at that. Wait, what? You need help with what? I ask, feeling a little confused. We need you to help us cover the costs, she says, as if this is just a normal thing to ask. I'm not going to lie. I was floored. I didn't even know what to say at first. My parents wanted me to give them money for Amy's wedding, the same Amy I haven't spoken to in 5 years, the same Amy who made my life miserable for most of our childhood, the same Amy who walked out of my house without so much as an apology that Thanksgiving. It felt like I was living in some alternate reality where none of that mattered. I mean, come on. They seriously expected me to help pay for her wedding? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Mom, why would you even think I'd want to do that? I asked, keeping my voice steady, even though I was already starting to get worked up. Mom seemed genuinely surprised. Kevin, it's your sister. Family helps family. That's when I snapped. I told her exactly what I thought. Family helps family? Really? Where was that energy when I needed help paying for trade school? You guys didn't lift a finger back then? But now you want me to hand over money for Amy's wedding? The same Amy I don't even speak to? Mom got real quiet after that, probably because she didn't have a good answer. I didn't stop there, though. I reminded her about all the times Amy got whatever she wanted while I had to fend for myself, how they let her walk all over me for years, and now they're asking me for money like none of that ever happened. After a minute, Mom finally said, "It's different, Kevin. We didn't have the money back then." I just laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how ridiculous it sounded. And you think I have money to just throw at Amy's wedding now? Do you even hear yourself? I'm not giving you a single dime for this. If you can't afford it, you shouldn't have promised it. Mom got defensive after that, saying they didn't want Amy to feel like they couldn't support her, especially in front of John's wealthy family. Apparently, they've been trying to keep up with his parents, who are loaded and throwing money at the wedding left and right. My parents wanted to contribute so they didn't look like they were falling behind. It was all just so shallow. I mean, who cares if John's family has more money? It doesn't change the fact that Amy's spoiled and entitled. But my parents were so wrapped up in this image they wanted to present that they were willing to beg me for money just to keep up appearances. I told Mom I wasn't going to help, that it wasn't my responsibility, and I didn't even care about the wedding. She tried to guilt trip me, saying how this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and how it would mean a lot to the family if I pitched in. But I wasn't budging. I told her straight up that she needed to figure this out without me. She sounded disappointed, but I wasn't backing down. We ended the call on a pretty awkward note, with her telling me she'd talk to Dad and figure out another way. The whole thing just left me feeling drained. I couldn't believe the nerve they had to even ask me for money after all these years, especially for Amy, of all people. It just brought back all the resentment I thought I'd buried after that Thanksgiving fight. The way my parents have always bent over backward for Amy, while I've had to figure everything out on my own. It's like nothing's changed. Over the next few days, I tried to forget about it, but it kept eating at me. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. I mean, it was my parents asking for help, and I've always been the kind of person who tries to do right by them, even when they frustrate me. But this felt different. It felt like they were crossing a line. I was still stewing over the whole thing when my dad called me a week later. Now my dad doesn't usually call unless it's something important, so I picked up right away. He cut straight to the point. "Your mom told me you won't help with Amy's wedding," he said. "No hello, no small talk, just straight into it." "Yeah, that's right," I said, feeling my stomach tighten. I could already tell this conversation wasn't going to go well. Dad let out a long sigh. "Kevin, we really need you to help us out here. We've already committed to paying for part of it, and now we're stuck. If we don't come through, it's going to look bad." There it was again, this obsession with how things looked. It wasn't even about Amy anymore. It was about saving face in front of John's family. I could feel the anger bubbling up again. "Look, Dad," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'm not responsible for the promises you made. If you can't afford it, then you shouldn't have offered to pay. I'm not going to bail you out." Dad didn't like that. He started going on about how family should stick together and how they've always done their best for us. But the more he talked, the more I realized something. They weren't asking for my help because they needed it. They were asking because they expected it, like it was my duty to clean up their mess. So I cut him off. "I'm sorry, Dad, but I'm not doing it. You'll have to figure something else out. And that was it. The conversation ended on a sour note, just like the one with my mom. They weren't happy with me, but for once I didn't feel guilty. I'd spent my whole life trying to keep the peace, but this time I wasn't going to let them push me around. All right, so after that conversation with my dad, I thought things would settle down. I'd made my stance pretty clear, and I figured they'd just leave it alone. I mean, what else could they do, right? But of course, that's not how my family works. It never is. A few days later, I get this message from my cousin Mark. Now, Mark's one of the few relatives I actually get along with. He's not into the whole drama thing, and we've always been on good terms. So when he texts me saying, "Hey, can we talk?" I figured it was something casual, maybe just catching up or whatever. But when we got on the phone, it was pretty clear that wasn't the case. "Kev, man, what's going on with your folks?" he asked, not even bothering with the usual small talk. "What do you mean?" I replied, already feeling a knot form in my stomach. I had a feeling I knew where this was headed, but I wasn't about to jump to conclusions. Mark sighed. "I just talked to your mom, and she was like, really upset. She said something about how you refused to help with Amy's wedding, and now the whole family's talking about it." And there it was. The thing I'd been dreading. I didn't think my parents would actually start spreading this around to the rest of the family, but I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. They'd done it before, especially when they wanted to paint themselves as the victims. This was just their style. Go around telling everyone their version of the story, leaving out all the important details that might make people see things differently. I tried to stay calm as I explained the situation to Mark. Yeah, they asked me to help pay for the wedding, and I told them no. I mean, I don't even talk to Amy, so why would I shell out money for her big day? It doesn't make sense. Mark listened quietly, and when I finished, he just said, "Man, I get it, I really do. But you know how your parents are. They're making it sound like you're the one causing problems, and now the whole family's talking about it. It's getting kind of messy." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my parents and me anymore. They dragged the entire family into this, and now I was being painted as the bad guy. I could feel the frustration bubbling up, but I didn't want to take it out on Mark. He wasn't the one stirring the pot, he was just giving me a heads up. "Great," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "So now everyone thinks I'm some selfish jerk, huh?" Mark hesitated for a second before answering. "Well, yeah, kinda. But it's not like people know the whole story, Kev. They're only hearing what your folks are saying. And you know how they like to spin things." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I know exactly how they like to spin things." After I got off the phone with Mark, I was pissed. I mean, it's one thing to have a disagreement with your parents, but to have them go around telling everyone in the family, twisting the story to make you look bad, that's a whole new level of low. I wasn't about to sit back and let them trash my name without setting the record straight. So I did something I wasn't sure I'd regret or not. I sent out a group text to the family. You know, the kind of message you think twice about before hitting send, but still do it anyway because you're just that fed up. Yeah, that kind. It wasn't anything crazy, but I laid out the situation as clearly as I could. "Hey, just wanted to clear some things up since I've heard a lot of talk going around. Yes, Mom and Dad asked me to help pay for Amy's wedding. No, I'm not helping. I haven't spoken to Amy in years, and it doesn't make sense for me to pay for something I'm not involved in. I didn't start this drama, but I'm not going to be guilt-tripped into doing something I'm not comfortable with. Thanks." Short, to the point, and hopefully enough to stop people from assuming the worst about me. I didn't expect anyone to respond, honestly. I just wanted to get my side out there before the gossip got any worse. But of course, things didn't exactly go the way I planned. Within minutes, my phone started blowing up. I got a text from my aunt, a call from my grandma, and even a message from some cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them were polite enough, asking if everything was okay or offering their support, which felt more like thinly veiled nosiness. But then there were the not-so-nice ones. My Uncle Gary, who's always been way too invested in family business, sent me this long-winded text about how family comes first and how I was being petty by holding on to old grudges. He went on about how Mom and Dad were only trying to do right by Amy and how I should help out for the sake of the family. It was infuriating, but I decided not to respond. Engaging with people like Gary would only make things worse. Then my mom called. I could hear it in her voice. She was pissed. "Kevin, what the hell is going on? Why are you sending messages to the whole family?" "Because, Mom, you've been going around telling everyone I'm refusing to help and making me look bad. I'm just clearing the air," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I didn't say anything that wasn't true," she snapped back. "You are refusing to help, and now everyone's upset because they don't understand why you're being so selfish." "Selfish? You've got to be kidding me, Mom. I'm not paying for a wedding I'm not even involved in. That's not selfish. That's just common sense," I shot back. Mom huffed into the phone. You don't understand, Kevin. We're trying to make sure Amy has the wedding she deserves, and now everyone thinks we can't handle it. That's not my problem, Mom. You're the ones who promised her all this stuff. If you can't afford it, then you shouldn't have made those promises. Don't drag me into it. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to her. But then she hit me with this. You're turning your back on family, Kevin, and one day, you're going to regret it. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I was just tired. Tired of the guilt trips, tired of the manipulation, tired of always being the one expected to clean up everyone else's mess. So I just said, I'm sorry you feel that way, Mom, and hung up. For the rest of the night, I just sat there staring at my phone as the notifications kept rolling in. I wasn't about to engage in more back and forth with my family, but I couldn't help but feel angry about how everything had blown up, all because I didn't want to fork over money for a wedding I wasn't even a part of. By the time I went to bed, I realized something. This whole situation wasn't just about money. It wasn't about the wedding, or Amy, or even my parents, really. It was about control. My family had always expected me to fall in line, to play along, to be the good son who never rocked the boat. And this time, I didn't. And maybe that's why they were so mad. Not because I wouldn't pay for the wedding, but because I finally said no. After that whole mess with the family texts and the phone call from my mom, I thought things would die down. I had made my point, and I didn't really care if people were upset with me anymore. I wasn't about to keep fighting over something that, in my mind, was pretty simple. I wasn't paying for my sister's wedding. End of story. But, like everything with my family, it didn't just end there. A few days after the last call, I get a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was probably just a delivery or something. But when I opened the door, I was pretty shocked to see my dad standing there. Now let me tell you, my dad doesn't just show up out of the blue like that. In fact, I don't think he's ever visited my place without calling first, so right away I knew something was up. Hey Kev, he said, looking a little awkward. Can we talk? I didn't know what to say at first, but I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. I wasn't in the mood for another argument, but it didn't seem like I had much of a choice. He walked in, kind of glancing around the living room like he hadn't seen it before, even though he had. It felt tense, like neither of us knew how to start this conversation. So, what's going on? I finally asked, figuring I'd let him make the first move. Dad sighed and sat down on the couch. I just wanted to clear the air, he said. Things have gotten pretty out of hand and your mom's really upset. I sat down across from him, not really sure where this was going, but ready to defend myself if it turned into another guilt trip. Yeah, I've noticed, I said. But I don't know what you want me to do about it. I've already explained where I stand. I know, Dad said, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to find the right words. But this whole thing with Amy's wedding, it's gotten bigger than it should have been. We didn't expect you to pay for everything, Kev. We were just hoping you could help out a little, as family. There it was again. Family. That magic word they always throw out when they want me to bend. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel that frustration bubbling up again. Dad, I've already said no. I don't have anything against you or Mom, but this is Amy's wedding. Amy, who I haven't spoken to in 5 years. It doesn't make sense for me to pitch in when I'm not even involved in her life. Dad nodded, but I could tell he wasn't really getting it. I get that, Kev, I do. But your mom, she's really struggling with all this. We promised Amy we'd help, and now it's turning into a mess. We don't want to look like we're falling short, especially with John's parents paying for everything. That's when I realized what this was really about. It wasn't about helping Amy or even the wedding itself. It was about appearances. They were more worried about how they looked compared to John's family than they were about the actual situation. They didn't want to seem like they couldn't handle it. I understand that, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But that's on you guys. You promised her. I didn't. You didn't ask me before making those promises, and now you want me to bail you out because it's gotten too expensive. I'm sorry, but that's not my problem. Dad leaned back, running a hand over his face. He looked tired, like the whole situation was wearing him down. You're right. We probably bit off more than we could chew, he admitted, but we didn't want Amy to feel like we weren't supporting her. I let out a breath, trying to be patient. And I get that. I really do. But you guys have always supported Amy. You've done more for her than you ever did for me. And I'm not saying that to be bitter, but it's the truth. So now, when you come to me, expecting me to help with something I'm not even involved in, it just feels wrong. Dad was quiet for a minute, and for the first time, it seemed like he might actually be listening. I guess we didn't see it that way, he said slowly. We just thought, well, maybe if you helped, it would start to mend things between you and Amy. I almost laughed at that. Mend things between Amy and me? As if throwing money at her wedding was going to magically fix 5 years of silence and resentment. Dad, money's not going to fix that, I said. Amy and I have our issues, and they go way deeper than this wedding. You can't just slap a Band-Aid on it with a check. He sighed again, nodding like he understood, but still not really getting it. I guess you're right, he said, sounding defeated. I just don't know how to make all this better. Your mom's really upset, and it's making everything harder. That was the thing about my dad. He wasn't a bad guy, but he always tried to fix everything for everyone, even when it wasn't his responsibility. And in doing that, he'd end up dragging himself into more stress than he needed. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Dad, I'm not trying to make things harder for you guys, but I'm not going to pay for Amy's wedding. I'm not. It's just not my responsibility. And you and Mom need to stop acting like it is. He nodded, looking down at the floor. All right, Kev. I hear you. We'll figure something out. For the first time in this whole mess, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to accept that I wasn't going to cave, that I wasn't going to swoop in and save the day with my wallet. It felt good to finally stand my ground and have him at least acknowledge it, even if I knew my mom wasn't going to be as easy to convince. Dad stayed for a little while longer, and we talked about other stuff, work, life, anything that wasn't wedding related. It was nice to just have a normal conversation with him, something we didn't do often enough. But eventually he had to leave, and as he stood up to go, he gave me this look like he wanted to say more but didn't know how. Take care of yourself, Kev, he said, giving me a pat on the shoulder before heading out the door. You too, Dad, I replied, watching him walk down the steps. As I closed the door behind him, I felt this weird mix of relief and frustration. I was glad we'd talked, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. My mom was still fuming, Amy was still getting married, and the family drama wasn't going to disappear overnight. But at least for now, I'd said my piece. I wasn't backing down. And honestly, that felt pretty damn good. All right, so after that talk with my dad, I thought for a second that maybe things would finally settle down. He seemed to understand where I was coming from, or at least he was willing to leave it alone for a bit. But I should have known better. When it comes to my family, things are never that simple. A few days passed, and things were quiet, too quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. At first it was kind of a relief. I thought maybe they were finally backing off, giving me some space to breathe. But then, the silence started to feel off. You know that feeling when you just know something's brewing, but you don't know what? Yeah, that. And of course I was right. One evening, I'm sitting at home after work, just relaxing, when my phone buzzes. It's a text from my Aunt Janet. Now, Aunt Janet is one of those relatives who's always involved in everyone's business. She's never really picked sides before, but she loves to stir the pot and act like she's the mediator in the family. So when I saw her name pop up, I already knew this wasn't going to be good. Her message said something like, "Hey Kevin, I've been hearing a lot about what's going on with the family. I think we should talk." I sighed, debating whether or not to even respond. But then I figured, what the hell, I might as well hear her out. Maybe she had some perspective I hadn't considered. Spoiler alert, she didn't. I called her, and right from the start it was clear where this conversation was headed. "Kevin, honey, I just want to understand why you're being so stubborn about this whole wedding thing," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she always uses when she's about to lay into someone. "I mean, it's your sister's wedding. Don't you think you could just help out a little? For the sake of the family?" There it was again. That same phrase. For the sake of the family. Like that was supposed to be the magic word that made me open my wallet and forget all the crap I'd been through. "I've already explained this to Mom and Dad," I said, trying to stay calm even though I could feel my patience thinning. "I don't have a relationship with Amy. We haven't spoken in 5 years, Janet. I'm not going to help pay for a wedding when I'm not even part of her life." Aunt Janet sighed like she was talking to a toddler who just couldn't understand simple logic. "But Kevin, family is family. You don't have to be best friends with Amy to do something nice for her. Weddings are a big deal. It's one of those events where everyone comes together. It could be a chance for you two to reconnect." I almost laughed at that. Reconnect? After 5 years of nothing? And I was supposed to do that by throwing money at her wedding? It sounded ridiculous. "I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Amy and I aren't going to magically fix things just because I help pay for her wedding. It doesn't work like that. and I'm not going to pretend like everything's fine between us when it's not. Janet was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she was starting to get it. But then she hit me with, "You're being really selfish, Kevin." That word, selfish. I'd heard it so many times over the last few weeks, and every time I heard it, it made my blood boil. Selfish? For not wanting to be dragged into a situation that had nothing to do with me? For standing up for myself after years of being overlooked and ignored? "How am I being selfish?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "I've done nothing but try to keep the peace in this family for years. I've stayed quiet, I've stayed out of the drama, and now when I finally say no to something, I'm the selfish one?" Aunt Janet clicked her tongue, clearly not impressed with my little rant. "You're not seeing the bigger picture, Kevin. This is about more than just you and Amy. It's about the family. Your parents are heartbroken over this. They just want everyone to come together. And I'm the one who's supposed to make that happen by giving them money?" I shot back. "Come on, Janet, you know that's ridiculous." She sighed again, this time sounding more annoyed than sweet. "Look, I'm just trying to help. I think you're making a big deal out of nothing, but if you're set on this, fine. Just know that you're making things harder for everyone." I didn't even know what to say to that. There was no winning here. No matter how many times I explained myself, it was never enough. I was always the bad guy in their eyes, the one causing problems. "All right, Janet," I said, tired of the whole conversation. "Thanks for the talk." Before she could respond, I hung up the phone. I didn't have the energy for it anymore. As I sat there, staring at my phone, I couldn't help but feel angry. Angry at my parents for dragging the family into this. Angry at my relatives for making me out to be the villain. And honestly, a little angry at myself for even caring about what they thought. I knew I was right to say no, but the constant pressure was starting to wear on me. The next day, I went to work like usual, trying to push the family drama out of my mind. But it was harder than I thought. Every time I checked my phone, there was another message from someone in the family, cousins, uncles, even a few people I hadn't spoken to in years, all chiming in with their opinions on the situation. By lunchtime, I'd had enough. I turned off my phone and shoved it into my toolbox, deciding to just focus on the cars in front of me and forget about the rest. At least at the garage, things made sense. You fix something, it works. Simple. None of this emotional mess that came with family. When I got home that night, I hesitated before turning my phone back on. Part of me didn't even want to deal with whatever new messages had come through. But of course, curiosity got the better of me. There were a few more texts from family, but one stood out, a message from Amy. Now, this was the last thing I expected. I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years, and suddenly there was a message from her, sitting right there on my screen. I didn't know whether to open it or ignore it. Part of me thought it might just be another guilt trip, or maybe even worse, some kind of demand for money directly from her. But after a minute of staring at the notification, I decided to open it. Her message was short, too short for how long we hadn't spoken. "Can we talk?" That's all it said. No apology, no explanation, just those 3 words. I didn't know what to make of it. On one hand, I was curious. On the other, I was wary. Why now, after all this time, was she reaching out? Was it because of the wedding? Because I'd refused to pay? Or was it something else entirely? I sat there, staring at the screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard as I tried to figure out what to say. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid whatever new drama this was about to stir up. But another part of me, maybe the part that still cared, even just a little, wanted to hear her out. After a long pause, I typed a reply. "Sure." And just like that, the door I thought I'd closed for good creaked open a little bit. So, after I sent that sure text to Amy, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen next. I mean, it had been 5 years, and we hadn't exchanged a single word during all that time. Now, all of a sudden, she wants to talk? It felt off, like there had to be something more behind it. But I didn't know what to expect, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. A couple of hours went by, and I started thinking maybe she wasn't actually going to respond. Maybe she just wanted to feel like she made an effort, or maybe she was waiting for me to make the next move. Either way, I was fine with the silence. But of course, just when I'd started to relax and move on with my evening, my phone buzzed again. It was Amy. She'd replied, "Can we meet up? I don't want to do this over text." I stared at the message for a while, not sure how to feel about it. Part of me was curious, sure. I mean, I'd been waiting for some kind of explanation for years. But at the same time, the other part of me was still holding on to all that frustration and anger. I didn't know if I was ready to meet her face to face, especially not with all the wedding stuff still hanging over our heads. But in the end, I figured if I didn't meet her now, I'd never get any real closure on this whole situation. So I sent back a quick reply. All right, when and where? We ended up agreeing to meet at this little coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. Nothing too fancy, just a quiet place where we could talk. As I walked in the next day, I could feel that familiar tension in my chest. I hadn't seen Amy in years, and I had no idea what this conversation was going to look like. She was already sitting at a table when I walked in, staring at her phone. She looked up when I approached, and for a second we just kind of awkwardly stared at each other. She looked different. Not in a bad way, just more grown up, I guess. It was weird seeing her after all this time. Hey, she said quietly. Hey, I replied, taking a seat across from her. The tension was thick, like neither of us knew where to start. After a long pause, she sighed. Look, I know things between us have been bad, and I get why you're mad. I probably deserve it. That caught me off guard. I'd expected her to jump straight into wedding talk, maybe even ask for money directly. But here she was, admitting she'd screwed up. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, letting her continue. I messed up a lot, I know that, and I'm not asking you to forget everything, but I just wanted to try to fix things, before it's too late. I leaned back in my chair, processing her words. Part of me wanted to be skeptical, to believe she was just saying this because she needed something from me. But another part of me saw how genuine she looked. Like maybe, just maybe, she really wanted to make things right. I don't know, Amy, I said finally. A lot's happened. You can't just undo all of that with an apology. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I know, but I have to try. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe this wasn't about the wedding. Maybe this was about something more. My stepmother tried to break off my engagement as a joke by sending my fiancé photoshopped pictures of me with my lover. So I exposed her for the witch she is, and my dad divorced her. Now she is blowing up my phone, begging me to convince my father to take her back because she has no money or job. So, I guess I should start from the beginning because otherwise none of this will make any sense. My name's Ben, I'm 27 and I'm getting married in 3 weeks. Or at least that's the plan. But of course, someone had to go and try to mess it up. I've been with my fiancée Katie for 10 years now. We've been through all the ups and downs you can think of. You know, normal stuff like graduating, getting jobs, surviving our early 20s together. It was all going smoothly, until my stepmom, Karen, decided to blow everything up. Now, Karen's been in my life since I was 14. She married my dad, Tom, when I was in 8th grade. Back then, she seemed pretty cool. I didn't really think much about it at the time. I figured, hey, if my dad's happy, I'm happy. I'd split my time between my mom's place and my dad's, and Karen, well, she acted nice enough at first. You know how people put on that face when they want to make sure you don't mess things up for them? Yeah, that was her. But after they got married, things started to change. Slowly, she started showing her true colors. And let me tell you, they weren't pretty. She'd take little jabs at me when my dad wasn't around. Like, if I had a bad grade or I left a mess somewhere, she'd act like it was the end of the world. But when my dad was there, she was sweet as pie. Made me feel like I was losing my mind sometimes because no one else ever saw her acting like that. There was this one time, I must have been around 15, and I'd just failed a math test. I was already beating myself up about it, but when I got home, Karen let loose. She gave me this whole speech about how I wasn't applying myself, and that if I didn't get my act together, I'd end up like my mother. Yeah, she went there. I told my dad about it later, and he was like, no, that doesn't sound like her at all. You must be misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Man, I was living with it. At first, I blamed myself. I figured I must have done something to set her off. Maybe I wasn't being welcoming enough or something. But then I realized that was complete BS. Karen didn't have a problem with me. She had a problem with me existing. See, to her, I was this reminder that my dad had a whole other life before her, and I think that really ate at her, so she started picking at me to get me out of the way. When I finally talked to my dad about it, I thought he'd have my back. We sat down, all three of us, for this family meeting. Karen, of course, acted like the victim. She started crying, actual tears, saying she had no idea why I hated her so much. She claimed I'd always been rude to her, never accepted her, and that she was just doing her best to make me feel like part of the family. My dad ate it up. I got kicked out of the conversation and left her alone with him, but I didn't go far. I stayed right outside the door and listened in, because I was desperate to know what was really going on. What I heard? Man, it was like a punch to the gut. She straight up told my dad that I was jealous of her and that I wanted my parents to get back together, so I was making up lies to get her out of the picture. She even said she thought I was the reason none of his other relationships worked out before her. Like, really? The kid was ruining his love life? I mean, get real. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just messing with me. She was playing some twisted game and she was winning. My dad was totally hooked on her. I figured if I said anything more, it would just make me look bad, so I shut up. I told myself I'd just tough it out, not give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. But here's the thing. When you hold on to all that crap for years, it starts to wear on you. Fast forward to now, and Karen's still around. My relationship with her has always been cold, but when I moved out for college, it got easier. I didn't have to deal with her much anymore. I'd only see her on holidays, and by then I could ignore her little digs. She kept up the act, of course, always trying to get under my skin. Like, she'd ask me stuff like, "So, Ben, when are you going to settle down?" Or, "Do you really think Katie's the one for you?" Speaking of Katie, she's been my rock through all this. She's met Karen, knows the whole story, and even though she was polite to her, she's always known Karen had it out for me. But Katie, she's not easily fooled. She knows me better than anyone. Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, right when everything should have been coming together for the wedding, Karen pulls this stunt. Katie gets this text from Karen totally out of nowhere with these fake photos of me and another woman. The woman in the photos? I barely know her. She's like a neighbor from my old neighborhood, and the pictures were from some group hangout. But Karen had photoshopped it to look like I was with this woman, just the two of us, all cozy like we were on a date or something. Then she went ahead and told Katie that I'd been cheating on her with this woman for months. She even wrote this whole dramatic message about how she was looking out for Katie and didn't want her to marry someone who'd betray her. Can you imagine? My stepmom, trying to ruin my life by faking an affair 2 weeks before my wedding? What kind of person does that? But here's where she messed up. Karen thought Katie would freak out and dump me on the spot. She told her not to even bring it up with me, saying it would just cause unnecessary drama and that she didn't want to get in the middle of it. Yeah, right. Karen didn't want to get caught, is what that was. But she underestimated Katie. Instead of believing Karen, Katie came straight to me, showed me the pictures, and asked what the hell was going on. I was in shock. I mean, I knew Karen was petty, but this was a whole new level. I explained everything to Katie, and she believed me right away. She knows me, she knows Karen, and honestly, the photoshopping job was pretty bad. Like, come on, Karen, at least try harder if you're going to sabotage my life. That's when I decided enough was enough. I called my dad that night absolutely livid. I laid everything out for him, the photos, the lies, the years of crap I'd put up with, and I gave him a choice. Either he kicks Karen out, or I cut them both off. I wasn't playing games anymore. This wasn't just about me. This was about my future with Katie. I wasn't going to let Karen ruin that. So yeah, that's where things started. But trust me, it gets a lot worse from here. So after I made that call to my dad, things really started to get intense. I'm not going to lie, I didn't expect him to handle it well. I figured he'd be all confused and probably not know how to react. But when I laid everything out for him, I could tell right away that he was shaken. I think he knew deep down that Karen wasn't who she pretended to be. I mean, no one's that good at hiding who they really are for that long. But even so, he sounded like he needed time to process it all. He told me, "Ben, I'll talk to her. Let me figure this out." Which honestly wasn't what I wanted to hear. Like, at this point, what's left to figure out? The woman photoshopped pictures of me cheating to blow up my relationship. That's not something you just talk about. But I gave him the space, told him to call me back when he'd decided what to do. I didn't feel great about it. I mean, Katie and I are about to get married, and instead of feeling excited, I'm dealing with this insane family drama. But whatever, I thought. I had no choice but to wait it out. A couple of days passed, and I hadn't heard back from my dad. So I tried to stay focused on the wedding plans and all that. Katie, bless her heart, was handling this way better than I was. She kept saying, "Don't worry, Ben, we're going to be fine. Karen's not going to ruin anything." And I wanted to believe her. But I also knew Karen wasn't the type to just back down. I was pretty sure she had more tricks up her sleeve. Then, one night, I get this call from my dad. It's late, like way past the time he'd normally call. Right away, I knew something was up. He sounds, I don't know, defeated? That's the only way I can describe it. He tells me that he confronted Karen about everything, and she denied it all at first, tried to play dumb like she didn't know what he was talking about. Now, you gotta understand, my dad's not the type to just let stuff slide. He's a pretty calm guy, but when he's mad, he's mad. He doesn't blow up, but he gets that serious, quiet tone, and you know he's not messing around. Apparently, that's what happened. He kept pressing her, showing her the texts, the pictures, everything. At first, Karen tried to laugh it off, saying it was all a misunderstanding or some kind of joke. Can you believe that? A joke. Like sending fake cheating photos right before your stepson's wedding is something to laugh about. but my dad wasn't buying it. He kept at her until she finally broke down and admitted it. But here's where it gets even crazier. She didn't just own up to it, she tried to justify it. She told my dad that she was worried about him. She said she was scared that if he paid for my wedding, I'd just keep asking him for more money. She went on this whole rant about how she thought I was going to bleed him dry and that she was just trying to protect their finances. Like, really? That's what she was worried about? And then she started crying. Again, typical Karen. And telling him she only did it out of love for him. That's her whole move, by the way. She screws up, then tries to guilt people by saying she's doing it for their own good. But my dad wasn't having it this time. He told her that this wasn't about money. This was about her trying to destroy our relationship. And honestly, for the first time in my life, I think he actually saw through her BS. I don't know exactly what happened next, but I do know my dad kicked her out. He told her to pack her things and leave, and just like that, she was gone. He said she didn't even try to fight it, just left in silence. I'm not gonna lie, when he told me that, I felt this massive weight lift off my shoulders. It's like all those years of dealing with her crap had finally come to an end. But here's the thing. It wasn't really the end. Not even close. Karen didn't just disappear into the night like I hoped she would. Oh no, she immediately started blowing up my phone. Calls, texts, emails, you name it. She was trying every way possible to get me to convince my dad to take her back. At first, I ignored her, because honestly, I wasn't about to entertain her nonsense. But she kept at it. She started saying stuff like, I didn't mean for this to happen, and I was just trying to protect our family. And here's the part that really got me. She tried to make it seem like I owed her. Like somehow, it was my responsibility to fix things between her and my dad. She even threw in some sob story about how she didn't have any money or a place to go. She'd quit her job a few years ago to focus on family, more like focusing on controlling everything. So now she was basically broke. That's not my problem though, is it? I wasn't the one who photoshopped fake cheating pics. She sent me this long email from a new address because I'd blocked her on everything else. It was full of all these guilt-tripping lines like, I never meant to hurt you, Ben, and I love your father more than anything. She even threw in some crap about how she always tried to be a good stepmother to me. That's when I really lost it. Like, were we living in the same reality? Because the Karen I know has been a nightmare from day one. I didn't respond to any of her messages, obviously. But I did show them to my dad, just so he could see what she was trying to pull. He was pissed, but he told me to just let it go, that he'd handle it. I knew that meant he was done with her for good, which was a relief. Still, it wasn't easy to just move on. I kept thinking about how close she came to ruining everything. If Katie hadn't trusted me, if she'd believed those fake photos, who knows where we'd be right now? I probably wouldn't be sitting here planning a wedding, that's for sure. So, yeah, things were looking up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. I mean, she's always been sneaky. She's always had this way of getting what she wants, and I knew she wasn't going to go down without a fight. But for now, I had to focus on the wedding. It was just a couple of weeks away, and after all the drama, I just wanted one thing to go smoothly. But knowing Karen, that wasn't going to happen. Update 1. So, after my dad kicked Karen out, you'd think things would start calming down, right? Nope. Karen, being Karen, had to keep dragging it out. I was already dealing with wedding stress, and now I had her constantly trying to weasel her way back into our lives. I figured blocking her everywhere would be enough, but then she got creative. Katie and I were out one day, checking out some last-minute wedding stuff, and we decided to grab lunch at this cafe near the venue. Everything felt good. We were relaxed, laughing, finally feeling like the wedding was close and we could just enjoy it. Then, right in the middle of our meal, I get a notification. It's Karen. She'd somehow found a way to email me again from yet another account. I guess she really couldn't take the hint. I didn't even want to read it at first. Katie told me to just ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it up, and it was the same old crap. More apologies. More fake remorse. She kept saying how she didn't mean to ruin everything, and how she just wanted the best for all of us. But the tone of the email was off. She was more desperate this time. I could tell she was getting freaked out about the whole situation. She mentioned how she was staying in some cheap motel and running low on money. She was practically begging me to talk to my dad, to fix things between them. She wrote stuff like, "You're the only one who can make this right, Ben. Your father listens to you." Yeah, Karen, he listens to me now because you finally showed him who you really are. The email went on for way too long, but what really caught my attention was this one part where she said, "I'll make sure to stay out of your lives if you just help me get back on my feet." Now that got to me. She was literally trying to bargain her way back in by promising to leave us alone. I showed the email to Katie, and she just rolled her eyes. Ben, she's never going to leave us alone, she said. And honestly, she was right. Karen wasn't someone who could just fade away quietly. That wasn't her style. I didn't reply to the email, obviously. But now I was starting to get this nagging feeling like she wasn't done trying to mess things up. I hadn't talked to my dad in a couple of days, mainly because I didn't want to drag him into more of Karen's mess, but I figured I should at least update him. So I called him that night. When I told him about Karen's latest email, he wasn't surprised at all. In fact, he told me that Karen had been trying to contact him too. She'd left him voicemails, sent him texts, and even showed up at his office one day. He said he didn't let her in, just told security to make her leave. He sounded exhausted, like he was over all of it, and I didn't blame him. I mean, this woman had turned his whole life upside down. What really threw me, though, was what he said next. She mentioned something about seeing you and Katie soon, he said. I froze for a second. What did that even mean? What? Like she's going to show up at the wedding? I asked, half joking but half serious because, let's be honest, with Karen, anything was possible. My dad said he didn't know what she meant by it, but he told me to be prepared just in case. Now I was officially on edge. The last thing I needed was Karen pulling some stunt at the wedding. Katie and I talked about it that night, and we agreed that we'd hire extra security for the day. Yeah, it was a little over the top, but better safe than sorry, right? I wasn't about to let Karen crash my wedding after everything she'd already done. A couple of days later, we were in the final stretch before the big day, and things were actually looking good. We had a plan in place for the wedding, security was all set up, and I was feeling more at ease. Then, guess what? Karen strikes again. Katie and I were doing a final walkthrough of the venue with our wedding planner, and everything was going smoothly. We were talking about seating arrangements and flowers when suddenly, out of nowhere, I see her. Karen. She was standing at the edge of the parking lot, just staring at us. I almost couldn't believe it. Like, what the hell was she even doing there? How did she even know we'd be there? I didn't tell my dad about our plans for that day, so the only way she'd know is if she was straight up stalking us. I pointed her out to Katie, and we both just stood there, dumbfounded. I was pissed. I mean, after everything, she had the nerve to show up like that. So I walked over to her, trying to keep my cool. When I got close, she had this smug smile on her face, like she'd won some kind of game. Ben, she said in this fake, sweet voice, I just wanted to talk. Talk? Now she wanted to talk? I told her straight up, this isn't the time or place, Karen. You need to leave. She gave me this look, like she was trying to make me feel sorry for her. I've lost everything, she said. Your father won't even speak to me, and I just want to make things right. I didn't even know what to say at that point. Like, lady, you did this to yourself. You don't get to play the victim now. I just told her, look, Karen, we're done. You need to move on and stop messing with my life. That's when she really lost it. She started yelling, right there in the parking lot, about how I was selfish, how I'd ruined her marriage, how I was turning my dad against her. It was wild. At this point, the wedding planner and Katie were standing there watching, probably wondering what kind of family drama they'd just walked into. I didn't want to make a scene, so I just told Karen to leave, or I'd call the cops. That got her to back off. She stormed off, yelling something about how I'd regret this. I didn't care. I just wanted her gone. After she left, I stood there for a second trying to wrap my head around what just happened. Katie came up to me and put her arm around me. She's not going to ruin this for us, she said. And I believed her. Karen could throw all the tantrums she wanted. She wasn't going to stop this wedding. But man, after that, I was on edge again. I knew Karen wasn't going to give up that easily. And now, with the wedding just days away, I had no idea what she'd try next. Update 2. After Karen's meltdown at the venue, I was really hoping that would be the last of her. I mean, how many times can a person embarrass themselves before they get the message, right? But nope, I guess I underestimated her ability to keep coming back like a bad penny. The days leading up to the wedding were supposed to be fun, stress-free, you know? But instead I spent most of that time looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster to drop. Katie, though, was a rock through all of it. I don't know how she managed to keep it together while I was losing my mind every other day. We had a long talk the night after Karen showed up at the venue, and Katie just kept saying, Ben, she can't control us. We're not letting her ruin this. And she was right. I had to stop letting Karen's drama get in my head. The next day, I went to pick up my tux from the rental place. Nothing too exciting, just one of those wedding checklist things. I was in a good mood because, For once, it felt like we were getting close to the finish line without another Karen-sized issue. I was wrong. I walk into the shop, and who do I see sitting on a bench outside? Yep, Karen. I swear she's like a professional stalker at this point. I almost turned around and left, but I wasn't going to let her scare me off. I had too much to do. As I walked past her, she stood up and blocked my path. Ben, please, just hear me out, she said. I could tell she was trying to act all calm and reasonable, but I wasn't having it. Karen, I don't have time for this. I told you to stop, I said, trying to keep it together, even though I was fuming inside. She didn't move. I need to talk to you. It's important. Just 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. I gave in, figuring maybe if I heard her out, she'd finally leave me alone. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to end well. Fine, I said, crossing my arms. 5 minutes, go. She started rambling on about how she and my dad hadn't officially filed for divorce yet, and how she still had hope they could fix things. She kept saying how she regretted everything, and how she was willing to change. I just stood there, waiting for her to get to the point. Then she dropped the line that almost made me lose it. I was thinking, maybe if you talked to your dad, explained that this was all a misunderstanding, maybe he'd reconsider, she said. You know how much he respects your opinion. I stared at her, completely stunned. She still didn't get it. After everything she'd done, she still thought I'd be the one to fix things for her. Like, how delusional can someone be? Are you serious right now? I asked, not even trying to hide my frustration. You want me to help you after everything you've done? She looked at me with this pathetic expression, like she thought I was actually going to feel bad for her. Ben, I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to protect our family. I love your father, and I love you too. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. You love me? Really? You tried to ruin my wedding. You've made my life hell since the day you married my dad. And now you're asking for my help? She looked like she was going to cry, but I wasn't falling for it. Karen, you need to move on. It's over. My dad's done, and so am I. That's when she snapped. The calm, reasonable act went out the window. She started yelling right there in front of the shop about how I was turning my dad against her, how I was destroying her life. She even accused me of stealing my dad from her. It was wild. People walking by were staring, and I could feel my face getting hot from embarrassment. I didn't even bother responding. I just walked past her and went into the shop. I could hear her still yelling as I left her outside. The whole thing was a mess. Later that day, I called my dad to tell him what happened. He wasn't surprised. Apparently, Karen had been trying to pull the same stunt with him, showing up at his office, leaving notes at his door. He told me he was done with her, but honestly, I didn't believe him. I've seen too many people get sucked back into Karen's drama. She's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you get. I didn't hear from Karen for a few days after that, and I started to think maybe, just maybe, she'd finally gotten the hint. I was wrong. It was 2 days before the wedding, and Katie and I were meeting up with my parents for a final dinner before the big day. We were sitting at this nice little restaurant, just chatting about the wedding and the honeymoon plans, when my dad's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I could see his face tense up. What's wrong? I asked, already knowing it wasn't good. It's Karen, he said, putting the phone down. She's threatening to show up at the wedding if I don't talk to her. My heart sank. I knew it. I knew she wouldn't just let it go. My dad looked at me, his face full of regret. I'm sorry, Ben. I thought I could handle it, but she's not backing down. Katie reached over and squeezed my hand. We'll figure this out, she said, but I could see the worry in her eyes too. We spent the rest of the night coming up with a plan. We couldn't risk Karen showing up and ruining the wedding. My dad offered to hire extra security, but I wasn't sure if that would be enough. I knew Karen. If she wanted to cause trouble, she'd find a way. As we were leaving the restaurant, my dad pulled me aside. Ben, I'm sorry you have to deal with this. I should have seen this coming a long time ago. I shook my head. It's not your fault, Dad. Karen's always been like this. We just didn't see it until now. He nodded, but I could tell he was beating himself up about it. I didn't blame him, though. Karen had fooled a lot of people over the years. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what Karen might do. Part of me wanted to believe she wouldn't actually show up, but the other part of me knew she was desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. The wedding was 2 days away, and I had no idea what to expect. All I knew was that Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Update 3. The wedding day finally came, and I was on edge from the moment I woke up. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was excited. I was finally marrying Katie, and that was all I ever wanted. But Karen had been lurking in the back of my mind for days, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was going to try something. Even with the extra security we had lined up, I still felt like we weren't totally in the clear. Katie and I had talked about it 100 times. We knew there was a chance Karen would show up, and we were ready to handle it if she did. But honestly, we were both hoping she'd finally gotten the hint and would stay far away from our wedding. Spoiler, she didn't. I spent the morning getting ready with my groomsmen, just the usual stuff, trying to stay calm, joking around to keep my mind off the potential disaster that could be looming. The venue was all set up, and Katie was somewhere across the hall getting ready with her bridesmaids. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from my dad saying, "Karen's here," but everything seemed fine so far. No news was good news, right? That was until about an hour before the ceremony. I was standing in the back room with my best man Mark when my phone buzzed. I saw it was a text from my dad, and my stomach immediately dropped. I opened it up, and sure enough, it was exactly what I didn't want to see. Karen's outside the venue. Security's holding her at the gate. I stared at the message for a second. Like maybe if I didn't respond, it would somehow make the problem go away. But I knew that wasn't how things worked. Karen had actually shown up. She'd really crossed that line. Mark saw the look on my face and asked what was up. I told him the situation, and he gave me this look like, "Dude, what do we even do now?" I didn't have a clue, but I wasn't about to let Karen ruin the biggest day of my life. So I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up right away. "Ben, she's refusing to leave," he said, sounding exhausted. "Security's doing their best, but she's making a scene." Of course she was. Karen never did anything quietly. "What's she even saying?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "She's going on about how you're making a huge mistake, how she has proof that Katie isn't right for you." My dad sounded pissed. "It's the same nonsense she's been spewing for weeks." "All right, keep her there. Don't let her anywhere near the venue," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be right out." I hung up and turned to Mark. "I'm going to deal with this. Just keep Katie calm. Don't let her know what's going on, all right?" Mark nodded. "You got it, man. You sure you want to handle this?" I didn't really want to, but what choice did I have? Karen wasn't going to leave unless I made it clear once and for all that she had no place in my life anymore. I walked out to the front of the venue, where the security guys were standing at the gate. Sure enough, there she was, standing there with that same look on her face, like she was some sort of martyr, like she was the victim here. It made me sick. The security guard spotted me and nodded. "This her?" he asked, like he didn't already know. "Yeah," I sighed. "I'll talk to her." Karen's eyes lit up when she saw me and she stepped forward, but the guard put his hand out to stop her. "Ben, thank God," she said, like I was her savior or something. "Please, just let me talk to you." I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking this was going to be a conversation. "Karen, what the hell are you doing here?" I said, keeping my distance. "I'm trying to save you from making a huge mistake," she said, like she was genuinely concerned. "I've been trying to reach you, but you keep shutting me out. You need to listen to me. Katie isn't right for you. She's been lying to you this whole time." Here we go again. I couldn't believe she was pulling this same crap even now. "Karen, you're delusional," I said straight up. "There's nothing you can say or do that's going to change what's happening today. I'm marrying Katie, and you're not welcome here." She flinched, like my words actually hurt her. "Ben, please, I have proof. I overheard her talking to someone about how she's only with you for your money. She's going to ruin your life." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. How far was she willing to go with this? She'd already faked photos of me cheating, and now she was making up some ridiculous lie about Katie. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" I said, shaking my head. "Katie doesn't care about my money, and you know that. You're just trying to tear us apart because you're miserable." She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't done. "This ends now, Karen. You need to leave. I'm serious. You've already lost my dad, and if you keep this up, you'll lose any chance of ever having a relationship with me again. Get out of here, or I'll have security drag you out. Your choice." I could see her starting to panic. She wasn't used to people standing up to her like this. She was used to manipulating her way through situations, but this time, it wasn't working. She glanced at the security guys, then back at me, her face going pale. "Please, Ben, don't do this," she said, her voice shaking now. "I'm your family." "No, you're not," I said, my voice steady. "Not anymore." She stood there for a second, looking like she didn't know what to do. Then, finally, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, waiting to make sure she was really leaving. I didn't turn around until I saw her car pull out of the lot and disappear down the street. I let out a long breath, feeling the tension leave my body for the first time in weeks. She was gone, finally. When I walked back into the venue, Mark was waiting for me. "Everything good?" he asked. Yeah, I said, smiling for what felt like the first time all day. She's gone. He clapped me on the back. Good. Let's get you married, man. And that's exactly what happened. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Katie looked absolutely stunning. And when I saw her walking down the aisle, everything else just faded away. For the first time in forever, it felt like Karen wasn't looming over us anymore. It was just me, Katie, and the start of our new life together. And you know what? We had the perfect day. No more drama, no more Karen, just us.